In a new decision, the U.S. Supreme Court has just ruled 9-0 in a case that involved the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This unanimous decision from the court, it was in favor of a woman who lost her son when a police officer killed that son during a traffic stop. Now, the story itself obviously comes with a lot of nuance, but the key takeaway is that the American citizen in this particular case, she prevailed against the state, and therefore, this unanimous Supreme Court decision expands all of our rights under the Fourth Amendment. But funny enough, the specifics of this case, they might not make that a universally good thing because it might make the job of a police officer that much more difficult and dangerous. But in order to explain what that means, I need to go through the details of this case together with you. To start with, let me give you a bit of background on what actually happened here. 9 years ago, on April 28, 2016, at approximately 2:45 in the afternoon, an incident took place over in Harris County, Texas. A police officer named Roberto Felix Jr. received a radio alert about a vehicle that had outstanding toll violation. Officer Felix, while driving down the highway, spotted that particular car, turned on his lights, and pulled it over. Now, the driver in that car, 24-year-old Ashton Barnes, he pulled over to the side and he stopped on the shoulder of the highway. So far, so good. Everything is by the book. Officer Felix then got out of his police cruiser. He walks over to the car and he asks to see Ashton's driver's license as well as his proof of insurance. Now, Ashton, he says that he doesn't have his driver's license on him and that the car is actually a rental, which was true. It was actually his girlfriend's rental car, and it was the rental car that had these unpaid tolls on it, meaning it really didn't have anything to do with him. Also, it is perhaps worth mentioning that driving without having your driver's license on your person in the state of Texas is technically a crime, although it's a very minor one. According to the Texas State Transportation Code, specifically subsection 521.025, drivers in the state must have their driver's licenses on them while operating a motor vehicle. But if you don't have your driver's license on you, you'll just be given a ticket, which you can actually dismiss if you go on over to the courthouse and just prove that you do have a license. It'll just cost you a $10 dismissal fee. Meaning, as a practical sense, that not having your license on you is a very minor issue in the state of Texas. Okay, so that's the situation that Ashton found himself in. He's in a traffic stop. He's driving a car that has unpaid tolls on it because it's a rental car. He doesn't have his license on him, and he's now rummaging through some papers in the car trying to find the insurance paperwork. This is, though, when things take a bad turn. Here is how this chain of events was described in the court filings. Quote, "During this interaction, Ashton was digging around in the car. Officer Felix warned Ashton to stop doing so, and claiming that he smelled marijuana, asked Ashton if he had anything in the vehicle Officer Felix should know about. In response, Ashton turned off the vehicle, placing his keys near the gear shift, and told Officer Felix that he might have the requested documentation in the trunk of the car. What happened next was captured on Officer Felix's dash cam." Now, we do actually have that dash cam footage, and fortunately, it's pretty clear visually. But just because of the angle, it's a little hard to make out what's going on. And so let's do this. I'm going to show you the footage, and then I'll give you a moment-by-moment breakdown of what actually happened, because otherwise you might not actually know what you're looking at. And also mention that all of this took place within the span of roughly 20 seconds, but it's a very, very densely packed 20 seconds. And so let's start with the dash cam from the officer's car.
Sure, go ahead and pop the trunk for me. Okay. Go ahead and put that paper off the side for me. Go ahead and shut that for me. Don't fucking move! Don't fucking move! Watch out, go through! Shots fired! Shots fired!
Okay, so let's unpack what we actually just watched there. Starting at 2:45 p.m., 28 seconds, Officer Felix orders Ashton to open the trunk of the car. At this time, you'll notice that the left blinker on that car is still on, indicating that the keys were still in the ignition and that the car itself was on. 5 seconds later, Ashton opens the trunk of the car. 3 seconds later, the left blinkers turn off, indicating that the car itself was turned off. 6 seconds later, Officer Felix tells Ashton to get out of the car. 1 second after that, the driver's side door opens. However, 3 seconds after that, you see that the left blinker turns back on, indicating that the car itself was turned back on and the key is in the ignition. 1 second after that, Officer Felix draws his weapon. And then, 1 second later, Officer Felix points his weapon at Ashton and begins shouting, "Don't effing move," as the car begins to move forward. At this point, the court document describes what happened. Quote, Officer Felix stepped onto the car's doorsill with his weapon drawn and pointed at Ashton and shoved his gun into Ashton's head, pushing his head hard to the right. Then the car started to move. While the car was moving, Officer Felix shot inside the vehicle with no visibility as to where he was aiming. The next second, Officer Felix fired another shot while the vehicle was still moving. After 2 seconds, the vehicle came to a full stop and Officer Felix yelled, "Shots fired," into his radio. Officer Felix held Ashton at gunpoint until backup arrived while Ashton sat bleeding in the driver's seat. At 2:57 p.m., which was just 12 minutes after the trunk was opened, Ashton was pronounced dead on the scene. Now, the relevant piece of information that we really need to take away from the shooting in order to understand the legal case moving forward is that Officer Felix chose to jump into the car as the car started to move forward. And within just 2 seconds of being on the car that's moving, he decided to shoot his gun at Ashton. Just 2 seconds of the car moving after he jumped on it himself. Meaning that you can make the argument that Officer Felix created the life-threatening situation that he found himself in. Now, I'm of course not saying that he did, only that an argument could be made that the police officer created the life-threatening situation. Now, after this shooting took place, there were 2 separate trains of legal activity: the criminal investigations as well as a civil lawsuit. On the criminal side, you had the Homicide Division of the Houston Police Department investigate this entire incident, and they compiled their findings into a report. This report was then presented to a grand jury who found no probable cause of an indictment, meaning that Officer Felix would not be prosecuted for murder. Also, the local precinct conducted a separate internal investigation, and they found that Officer Felix did not violate their standard operating procedures. This meant that from just a criminal perspective, there was nothing that Officer Felix had to worry about. In the eyes of the law, from that perspective, he followed police protocol and he killed Ashton only while acting in self-defense while he truly and rationally believed that his life was in danger. So that's all on the criminal side. However, on the civil side, Officer Felix was not as lucky. You see, Ashton's parents, they filed a lawsuit on behalf of their son, arguing that what Officer Felix did during that traffic stop amounted to excessive force under the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. Listen, it's obvious that the financial system is not looking too great. After being pumped up with trillions of virtually free government dollars for many, many years now, well, the stock bubble might actually burst in the near future. And in that process, unfortunately, it could take away the nest egg of anyone who happens to be exposed to it. And so consider taking this opportunity to diversify into something which is beyond the grasp of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street: physical gold and silver. And the best company to use, in my opinion, is the sponsor of today's episode, American Hartford Gold, who, I should mention, is also my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. And besides myself, they have thousands of 5-star reviews from other Americans, and they also have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. And working with them is rather simple. They have a huge selection of coins, bars, and rounds to choose from. They have super friendly staff who you can call, and they can set up either gold delivery directly to your doorstep, or they can even set you up in a gold IRA. And then lastly, best of all, if you tell them the Roman sent you, they will throw in a free gold coin with your first qualifying purchase. So give them a call. The number is 866-242-2352. That's 866-242-2352. Or you can simply text Roman to 65532. I'll also throw a link to their webpage. It'll be down there in the description box below. And in case you haven't been in a high school civics class in a while and you forgot what the Fourth Amendment is, let me read you the entirety of the text. Quote, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized." Now, initially, at the lower court level, Ashton's parents lost the case. The district court, they issued a judgment in favor of Officer Felix, saying the following, quote, "At the moment in time the officer fired his weapon, he reasonably believed that his life was in danger. Therefore, the officer did not violate the Fourth Amendment." Ashton's parents, they then appealed that decision to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. However, the appeals court also ruled against them. In their decision, you had the Fifth Circuit lay out the legal standard upon which they evaluate these types of officer-involved shootings. And they explain how, according to their legal test, it does not matter what happened prior to the shooting. As long as at the moment of the shooting, the officer believed that his life was in danger, well, it did not matter how he got into that situation. All that mattered was that the officer was in a life or death situation. Here's specifically what they wrote. This was again from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Quote, "We may only ask whether Officer Felix was in danger at the moment of the threat that caused him to use deadly force against Ashton. In the circuit, it is well established that the excessive force inquiry is confined to whether the officers or other persons were in danger at the moment of the threat that resulted in the officer's use of deadly force. This moment of threat test means that the focus of the inquiry should be on the act that led the officer to discharge his weapon. Any of the officer's actions leading up to the shooting are not relevant for the purposes of an excessive force inquiry in this circuit." In the totality of their decision, they were citing an earlier precedent that created that legal standard, meaning that according to the legal standard that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals was using, the so-called moment of threat test, it did not really matter that the police officer put himself in that situation by jumping into the car. The singular question is whether or not, at the moment of danger, did the officer have a reasonable fear that his life was an imminent threat. The appeals court found that he did, and therefore there was nothing else to discuss. However, Ashton's parents, they appealed this decision as well all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the central legal question that Ashton's parents brought up to the U.S. Supreme Court was simply a question of timing, whether courts can look only at the last 2 seconds right before the shooting, or whether they can also consider the earlier events, the ones that led up to those 2 seconds. And after hearing oral arguments from both sides, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor of Ashton's parents. And in doing so, they effectively eliminated the so-called moment of threat test. Writing the opinion for the majority of the court, you had Alina Kagan write the following, quote, "The question here is whether that framework permits courts in evaluating a police shooting or other use of force to apply the so-called moment of threat rule used in the courts below. Under that rule, a court looks only to the circumstances existing at the precise time an officer perceived the threat inducing him to shoot. Today, we reject that approach as improperly narrowing the requisite Fourth Amendment analysis. To assess whether an officer acted reasonably in using force, a court must consider all the relevant circumstances, including facts and events leading up to the climactic moment." Now, the entire federal legal system works exactly on these types of rules, tests, standards, and precedents set forth by the U.S. Supreme Court, meaning that moving forward, any other officer-involved shooting in the whole country will no longer be judged by this moment of threat test. That test is literally no more. Moving forward, the courts will have to, quote, "consider all the relevant circumstances, including facts and events leading up to the climactic moment." This is a brand new Fourth Amendment legal standard, which on the one hand is a good thing for U.S. citizens. It gives all of us more protections under the Fourth Amendment. We are now all better protected from police escalation. However, for police officers, this creates more hurdles because now it won't only matter if at the very moment of the shooting, they believe their life was in danger. Instead, the courts will now look at the totality of the events that led up to that particular moment. And while you hope this will just lead to more justice, you can easily imagine a scenario where a police officer does everything by the book. He still finds himself in a dangerous situation with someone trying to kill him. The officer shoots, injures, and or kills that other person. But now that officer might be on the hook if you have a DA who's making the argument that the officer himself somehow created that dangerous situation. However, I would love to know your thoughts on this particular decision that just came out of the U.S. Supreme Court. Do you think on net this is a positive? Do you think that the fact that this creates more protections for us under the Fourth Amendment is a good thing? Or do you think that it's outweighed by the negatives that are going to be incurred by police officers across the country? I'd love to know your thoughts. Please leave them down in the comments section below. I'll be reading through them later today as well as into the week. If you'd like to read either the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals opinion or the U.S. Supreme Court opinion, I'll throw those links down into the description box below if you want to peruse them for yourself. And as always, if you appreciate content like this, I really do hope you take a quick moment to smash that like button so that this video can reach ever more people via the YouTube algorithm, and also consider smashing that subscribe button as well. That way you will be informed of any new videos that we publish on this platform as soon as we publish them. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.